Okay. Today's daf we're going to learn is Nazir, daf Vav. Today's daf is sponsored by Ruth Leah with gratitude to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for her recovery and return to health 1 year after being caught in a chlorine gas leak. Thanks to my family and friends around the world for their unstinting encouragement and support. Glad to have you in good health with us. Okay, we are now going to continue on our daf. I will warn you, the beginning of today's daf is the structure is incredibly simple. The content is quite complicated. For that, I made a study guide. I did not have an opportunity to translate it into English, but I'm hoping that with the charts that it will help you follow, and I will share the screen and show it on the screen while we learn. If you are listening, then I recommend you open them. It will be very useful. We started yesterday with Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda had made this unique statement. Until now, we assume that anytime someone is a leper, while they happen to also be a Nazir, the days of leprosy are basically, we pause and then restart, right? That's how it works. You stop your counting. It doesn't cancel your days like it does with impurity. Impurity, it's very clear in the Torah. All the previous days are canceled, and you start your nazirut from the beginning. But if you're a leper, we just put the whole nazirut on pause. So stop, and as soon as, and that's what the Mishna said, you immediately start counting after. Okay, as soon as you finish your purification process. Comes Rav Chisda and says something very unique. He says when the Mishna says that, it's only talking about a case where it was a short period of nazirut. But if it was a long period, then you can overlap. Your leprosy days count as your Nazir days. To which Rav Shrevi said, it doesn't make any sense. And then he said basically we have a problem. How are you going to understand our Mishnah? So because our Mishnah says both things, right? It doesn't cancel the previous days, but you do stop. And then he said in a 30-day term, which is what Rav Chisda said the Mishnah would work for, in a 30-day term, you would cancel the previous days because the leper has to shave at the end of the process, and then you need a 30-day hair growth. So of course it cancels all the previous days. So the only way to understand our Mishnah is in a long term, and then it basically goes against Rav Chisda, because Rav Chisda said in the long term, they overlap the days. And the Mishnah said in the long term, right? Basically, we proved it must be a long term. You basically start, right? You pause and continue your count once you're done. So something didn't jive there. Rav Trevi basically said that the Mishnah has to be talking about a case where it's nazirut mu'etet, the way Rav Chisda says, doesn't mean 30 days. It means you have 30 days left. And if there's exactly 30 days left, which is a very unique way to understand the Mishnah, in a very rare case where you specifically become a leper when you have exactly 30 days left. If it's less than 30 days left, it's going to actually cancel the days, and the Mishnah wouldn't be talking about that case. If it's more than 30 days left, then the leprosy days would count, and you wouldn't say matchilim u'nem miyad, you start the count again. So basically, in order to resolve that problem, we put our Mishnah in a very unique case according to Rav Chisda. What we're going to do today, until we get to the next Mishnah, and that's the harder part. Once we get to the next Mishnah, it's easy ride. But the first part is 2 sources are going to be brought, 2 tannaitic sources. One is from our Mishnah with the Braita on that Mishnah, and the other is, which is also from a Tosefta, and the other is going to be a Tosefta. And both of those are going to be brought. They're both long-winded sources, a little bit more complicated, the content of them. But the basic point, and this is why I say the structure is very simple, they're going to basically say these tannaitic sources clearly contradict Rav Chisda, and in the end, we're going to have no answer, which seems to be, the Gemara seems to be rejecting Rav Chisda entirely. So if you're not convinced by yesterday's answer, have no fear. We're going to have more difficult questions on him, and we're going to be left with saying, where did you get this from? So Mativ Rami Barcham at the bottom of Nun Ham Ben. Nazir shahayat tameh b'safek u'muchlat b'safek. We now have a Nazir. You became a Nazir, and then you think that you were impure to the dead, but you're not sure. So maybe you were, maybe you weren't. You also think that maybe you were a mitzvah or muchlat, maybe you weren't. Now that's a little bit strange. You have to go to a Kohen. It's not like I can think I'm a mitzvah or muchlat. You're only a mitzvah or muchlat if the Kohen determines. So what exactly it means to be a safek mitzvah or muchlat is not so clear. Whether you're a leper that was defined by a Kohen is. Some people say I think it's the Rush who basically suggests, when we're going to get to this, it's a Mishnah on Daf Nun Tet Amud Bet, so we're almost there. Basically, they're going to suggest that what it means is 2 people went to a Kohen, thinking they were lepers. One was determined to be a definite leper and one was not, and we're not sure which one. So that could be an example of a suffix where you're not sure. You're not sure if you were the one who we said or someone else, and obviously you have no way to determine anymore. So you're in this situation. It becomes a very interesting, this is one of those, the rabbis have kind of a fun time with this because, what are all the possibilities and what are all the permutations of what could be? So let's talk about all the problems with this case, okay? Basically, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to do 4 shavings, okay? Later, the Gemara will get into why can't you overlap some of the shavings. But basically, a metzora has to do 2 shavings. One when they finish their days of being sick with leprosy. And then there's a 7-day purification process at the end of which also the metzora, regular leper, shaves. The Nazir who nitma, we know, shaves. And then also we're going to have the end of your nazirut, you need to shave. So what's going to happen here is now, before actually I share my screen, I just wanted to say another point. In order to eat, right now, when you become a leper, you can't eat sacrificial meat. This is different than if you're a Nazir who becomes impure. Nazir who becomes impure, gets, purified, and that's it. They can already eat meat, sacrificial meat, there's no issue. But a metzora, if they didn't bring their sacrifices and do their shavings, they can't eat sacrificial meat. Like they're forbidden, basically the sacrifices the leper brings and the shaving permits him to eat sacrificial meat. There's no such prohibition on the tamei meat. So we're now going to divide it into at what point are you permitted to eat sacrificial meat, and at what point are you permitted to do all the things. And the Nazir, basically, at what point do we assume you finished your Nazirite term? Okay, so we're going to I'll read this inside first, and then I'll explain. So a Nazir who's tamei b'safek and muchlep b'safek, maybe a leper, maybe impure Nazir, maybe none of them, and maybe just a regular Nazir. Okay, we don't know. He's definitely a Nazir, or she's definitely a Nazir. Ochel b'kodashim la'achal shishim yom. After 60 days, they can already eat sacrificial meat, because basically after 60 days, they're going to finish. And what we're going to do is, I'll first explain what we're going to do, and then I'll explain the why. So basically what we're going to do is, after 30 days, the first 30 days, you do 1 shaving. That's for in case you were a leper. Then you really want to do a shaving 7 days later for the second leprosy, but you can't because maybe, I'll already start saying, all right, let's even go first, okay? Theoretically, you should be able to shave for being a metzora right away, right? As soon as you're done being a metzora. But what? You have to wait 30 days because if you were, and we're assuming you're a Nazir for 30 days, the easiest case is you were just a Nazir, right? If you were just a Nazir, well then, and you're not actually a metzora, you can't shave your hair until 30 days pass. Because once 30 days pass, so at least if you were just a Nazir, you'd be able to shave at that point. So therefore, you have to wait the first 30 days. Okay, we're going to explain each stage why you have to wait another 30 days. So again, if you were just a Nazir and you really weren't a leper, you're not allowed to shave until your 30 days is up. So once your 30 days is up, we can let you shave, but we're going to say maybe you were a leper, so shave for your leprosy. Then you want to shave 7 days later. That's normally what a leper does. What's the problem? Well, maybe you weren't a leper at all. And maybe you were a Nazir who became impure. Now, if you were a Nazir who became impure, here's right on the second chart of the sheet, then, right, these are all the permutations and possibilities of what could be. If you were a Nazir that became impure, then you'd have to wait the first 30 days to do your shaving for being impure. Why? And regular Nazir doesn't have to wait 30 days. But since we're not sure if you were impure, maybe you're just a regular Nazir. So in other words, no matter what we've already proven, you can't shave until the first 30 days are over because maybe you're just a Nazir. Maybe none of these other things happened to you. So if you were a Nazir that became impure, what you would do is, let's say that you were definite, you would shave after the first 30 days. And then, because maybe you were a regular Nazir, then what does that do? Remember, when you do your shaving for impurity and bring your sacrifices, then you start your count from the beginning. So then you're going to need another 30 days. So now going back to this person who's not only a Nazir shenitma, but possibly also has leprosy, if you want to shave 7 days after those first 30 days, you can't. Because maybe you're in the second 30 days in section number 2 here, maybe you're just a Nazir who became impure and you need to wait 30 days until you finish your nazirut. Right now, you could be a regular Nazir, in which case you definitely can't shave your hair. So you basically shave after the second set of 30 days, your second shaving for the Metzora. Now, what's the issue? Well, now, okay, if you are a Nazir, you now have two possibilities, right? You shaved for your Metzora, you still might be Tameh. So in order to shave for being Tameh, what are you going to need? Another 30 days, because maybe, okay, here's the maybe you were a Metzora, that maybe you weren't Tameh Lamet at all, but maybe you were a leper. Now, if you were a leper, what would you do? So again, what did we just learn? You shave after the first 30 days, because maybe you were just a regular Nazir. You shave, you have to wait another 30 days for the second one, because maybe you were a Nazir that became impure also. So, or instead. So you push your shaving off 30 days, and now you have to keep 30 days of Nazirut, because what did we learn? Metzora days don't count, right? So you're going to need to shave, right? You're going to, basically, if you want to now, right, now we're in the case of the third one. The third one is theoretically to get rid of the suffix that maybe you were nitma, but you can't shave right away because maybe you're in your regular term of Nazirut now, and then you're not allowed to shave them. So you then wait another, after you shave those 30 days, you wait another 30 days, and that's basically permutation number 4 here. Because if you had all those things, you were a Nazir, you became impure, and you had leprosy, then basically the first shaving would be for the Metzora, the second would be the second of the Metzora, each with 30 days break. Then you would do your shaving of impurity after another 30 days, and then you would keep your Nazirut of Tahara. So the worst case scenario is that you're going to need 120 days. And since that's the worst case scenario, we have to basically operate as if that's the only option, because we can't allow, the whole problem is we can't allow any shaving before you, you can't shave if maybe you're a Nazir right now. And in all these possibilities, right, if you look at this chart, the Tiglach Tahara is either, right, at 30 days, at 60 days, at 90 days, or at 120 days. So because of that, you're always going to have a problem that you can't shave, because maybe right now you're in this period of Nazirut. Okay, I hope that's clear. I know it's a little bit complicated, but that's how we get to. I'm going to read it inside again. If you're Tameh b'safek u'muchla b'safek, you eat kodashim. You can eat sanctified meat after 60 days, because we can assume that after the first 2 sets of 30 days, you've finished, right? You've done your shavings for the leper. And then shotei yayin u'mitameh l'meitim la'achar 120 yom. Your Nazirut will only end definitively. In other words, maybe it ended after 30, but you don't know. So basically, you keep all the prohibitions of Nazir till day 120. Okay, that's reasonably clear. Okay, in other words, why each time we add the 30 days? Because maybe you're just a Nazir. Maybe you're a Nazir that became impure, in which case you need 60 days. Maybe you're a Nazir that was a leper but wasn't impure. For that, you would need 90 days. Or maybe you have all 4, and then you're going to need 120. For which we have a Tosefta on this. Tanei Allah, there's a Tosefta that says, and this is in the first chart, you see, right, it's according to the Mishna, we're going to see it's in Nazirut Mu'etet, that's what we're going to say right now. In what case is the Mishna referring to? B'Nazirut Mu'etet, a short term of Nazirut, which was a 30-day term. That's what we just explained. Since it was 30 days, every time we might have been, you might always be in your stage of the actual Nazirut. So basically, we have to push you off, right? And we can't let you shave now, so we have to give you 30 days in case right now is your Nazirut Tahara that you're dealing with. But Nazirut Bat Shana, let's say you took a Nazirut for a year. So now we're going to do the exact same thing, but with years. Instead of 30 days each one, it's going to be a year. So you're going to do a shaving after the first year, because again, maybe your first year you're a Nazir, you can't shave. After the first year, you do your first Nazirut shaving, you have to wait another full year. This is just a good review of the previous, because maybe now you're in your period of Nazirut, because maybe your first year you were just impure to the dead, in which case, after you do the shaving for the impurity of the dead, you now have to do your whole entire new year of Nazirut. So you can't shave at all that whole year. So then you do your second shaving, which is just in case you're a Metzora. Then you have to wait another complete year, because maybe you were just a Nazir who's a Metzora. And therefore, if you want to shave because maybe you were impure to the dead, but maybe you weren't, in which case, this is your year of Nazirut. So you can't shave the entire year. So you push it off another year, and then you get your Tiglachat of purity, right now you're in your last. If the worst case was all those things were true, this last year counts as your actual nazirut. So again, after 2 years, you'll be able to eat sacrificial meat. After 4 years, you'll be able to drink wine and be impure to the dead and cut your hair. So that's that. Okay, so far so good. Well, here comes the question on Rav Chisda. Isakadata salkin leyome. Now, if you say that Mitzorah days could count as Nazir days, then there's an overlap here, okay? And then what would the count be? And I'll show you in a minute how we get to this count. Tizkele, in the 4 years, okay, in the 30 days, there's nothing to talk about. You're going to need 30 days no matter what in between each one. But in the case of, because why? Because you're always going to need 30 days of hair growth after this, the 2 Mitzorah shavings, right? So the third one, the truth is those need 30 days because of your nazirite. But once you did your third one, you're going to have to wait another 30 days for your shaving of your nazirut of tahara because you need 30-day hair growth. But if it's a whole year, then if it's the year one, it's going to be enough to do 3 shanim u'shloshim yom, 3 years and 30 days. How's that going to work? Okay, so here's the third chart on the page. We're going to go through all the possibilities. If you were just a Nazir, so at the end of the first year, you would shave and you'd be finished. Okay, but we're concerned that maybe you're a Nazir who became impure. So what do? First year is your Tuma, right? You're going to only be able to shave at the end of the first year, just in case you were actually a Nazir. Then after you shave at the end of the first year, all your previous days are canceled. You have to start again. 2 years. Okay. What if you're a Nazir who got leprosy? So you would shave after the first year because you can't shave before that. Maybe you're a Nazir, right? Going back to the first one, maybe you're a regular Nazir this year. You can't shave the second one of a Mitzorah till another year passes because maybe really your first year was the impurity and now you're a Nazir that's pure and you weren't really a leper at all. So you have to wait an entire year for that. But what happens at that point, if Rav Chisda is right, that Mitzorah days count as Nazir days when you're in a long, and you're in a long Nazirut here, it's a year long, then when should you be able to shave your Tiglacha Tahara? 30 days later, because you already kept Nazirut for more than a year. All you need is hair growth of a month. So 2 years and 30 days. Now let's go to put all those together. Permutation number 4 would be, again, 1 year for Mitzorah for leprosy, 2nd year for the second leper shaving, 30 days for the impurity shaving, because you don't need to, at this point, your worst, right? Maybe you're a Nazir, but your Nazir only needs 30 days, right? So shave in case you're, right? So you can shave after 30 days. And then once you shave because you're impure, at this point, it cancels all your previous days and you need another year. So that comes out to 3 years and 30 days. It's really 2 years and 30 days plus another whole year. So it comes out to 3 years and 30 days, and that's not what the Tosefta suggested. So therefore, they say that goes against Rav Chisda, because why did they say you need an entire year? Because there is no overlap, okay? You can't say it's really this case that's the most important. If you were just a Nazir who had leprosy, you would do, right? Mitzorah after a year, another Mitzorah shaving after a year, and then you would just need 30-day hair growth because all those days overlap and count as both. So clearly, we have a problem with Rav Chisda from this source because it actually said you need an entire year and not just 30 days. That was question number 1. Question number 2 is not as complicated a case. It's just a very long-winded argument. What I did here to make it easier, again, I'm sorry I didn't have a chance to translate into English, but I'll obviously translate as we go along. I split it into, okay, we're going to see this six stages of this Braita. Okay, so actually we learned parts of this before. The Od Mativ Ravashi. So now we're bringing a Tosefta, different source entirely, different topic. It's similar topic, but different. It's about leprosy, obviously, because that's our topic. But it's going to be about how do we know that the leprosy days don't count in the count, okay? And then what we're going to do is we're going to learn this bright to forget about Rav Chisda for now. But what we're going to do is, remember, Rav Chisda said it all depends. Leprosy days don't count if it's a short term, but if it's a long term, they do count for your Nazir days. And this is a source that basically says we're going to prove that leprosy days don't count. And then we're going to show at the end, it must be talking about a long period of nazirut because that can't possibly be talking about a short period, which will show why. And then they're going to say this obviously contradicts Rav Chisda. But until we get there, it'll be a little while. So let's go through. So Rav Ashi brings this source. It starts with a very basic question. What do we know about the Torah? The Torah tells us if a Nazir becomes impure, it cancels all the previous days. And obviously you don't count them as Nazir days. So according to the Torah, all we have is that days of impurity when you're a Nazir don't count. So how do we know that leprosy days don't count? That's the brightest question. This is, by the way, I said it's a Tosefta. It's not a Tosefta, my mistake. This is a Sifrei. This is a Midrash halacha from it's called Torah Kohanim. Also, it's the Midrash halacha on Vayikra. So now, which makes sense because it's leprosy, which comes up in Vayikra, on the book of Vayikra. So now we have the following. First stage is we're going to learn it from laws of Tumah and say the following. Vidinhu. It's just a very logical argument. Why? Well, we're going to say this equals that. So therefore, whatever's true for this is going to equal that. So you may tum'ah, megalech, maybe korban. What do you do when you're a Nazir who becomes impure? You shave and you bring a sacrifice. V'yimei chaluto, if you become a leper, what do you do to finish your process? Same exact thing. Megalech, maybe korban. You shave and you bring sacrifices. So it's very obvious. Since both you shave and you bring sacrifices, ma yimei tumato ein olin lo min haminyan. Since the days that you're impure don't count, same thing, your days that you're a leper also won't count. So we're basically saying since A equals B, then some footnote about A equals some footnote about, or, some extra thing, okay? So since when it comes to shaving and bringing a sacrifice, they're the same, they must be the same in terms of the days not counting. To which, in the second stage now, the Gemara is going to reject that and say no way, no how, because there are differences between impurity and leprosy. And therefore, you can't say everything that's true for impurity is true for leprosy. Lo, imamarta b'yimei tumato, you want to compare them? But what do we know about days of impurity? They cancel all the previous days. That's what we've been learning about, right? You start from the very beginning. But leprosy days don't count all your previous days. Don't cancel all your previous days. So therefore, if they don't cancel all the previous days, maybe they do count as Nazir days, right? We have no idea. So you can't learn it from them. So now we're back to square one. We're going to learn it from something we learned about previously in the Masechet. Amarta kavachomer. So now they say, we have a way to go. It's a kavachomer. Uma Nazir, we're going to bring a kavachomer, but not from a Nazir that became impure, but a unique case of a Nazir who's impure, a different kind of case, which is the following. We're going to find a Nazir that became impure whose days aren't canceled. What would that be? Remember, Nazir bekevel. If you take upon Nazirut while you're in a cemetery. So in that case, remember, you don't bring the sacrifices and it doesn't cancel your previous days. You don't have previous days, right? So we're going to say the following. Uma Nazir bekevel. What happens when I take upon I'm going to be a Nazir, but I'm in a cemetery. So I walk out of the cemetery. I now have to go through a purification process. And I don't shave my hair, though, because I'm not a Nazir that became impure. I was impure to begin with and took on my Nazirut while I was impure. So what do we say? My hair that I'm going to shave at the end of my period of Nazirut, the hair I'm growing right now while I'm impure, is actually ra'oi l'tiglachat Nazirut. It's going to be shaved off when I end my Nazirut. Okay, that's the Nazir bekever. My hair is right now going to be shaved off when I end my Nazirut, which kind of means, it means, in other words, that I'm already on my way to counting Nazirut, even though I'm not, right? I'm not counting them as days of Nazirut, but my hair growth is going toward my Nazirut. And yet, but these days don't count as Nazir days, right? I'm going to have to only start counting once I'm done being purified. So logic would state that days of leprosy, now when I'm a leper, what happens? I have to shave my hair at the end of the leprosy stage, right? Twice, which means that any hair I'm growing right now while I'm a leper is not going to be shaved off when I'm finished my nazirite term. So therefore, it's obviously less likely to be counted as Nazir days. So lo kol sheken, it's if when I'm a Nazir bekever, my hair is growing toward my Nazirut, and yet it still doesn't count as days of Nazirut. Obviously, in a case where my hair is not growing toward my Nazirut, all the more so, it's definitely not going to count. So at this stage 3, we've already proven our point. Okay, we've gotten to the conclusion. We can't learn it from regular laws of impurity, but we can learn it from a Nazir that took upon nazirut in the grave. Since those days don't count, also these days don't count. Now, that was all about Yemei Chaluto. What is Yemei Chaluto? That's when the Nazir says you're a definite Nazir, right? And you wait till you heal. After you heal, you shave, and then you do this 7-day purification process, at the end of which you shave again. So those are called Yemei Sifro, the days of counting, those 7 days of counting. So now they want to know, well, this only proved Yemei Chaluto. How do we know Yemei Sifro also? Now, in the end, there's really no reason to distinguish, and that's kind of what the Gemara is going to say. It's not really the strongest question, because why would you even think that if Yemei Chaluto don't count, obviously the days of counting don't count because you're still a leper. But anyway, the Gemara is going to ask it. Again, it's not the Gemara, it's the Midrash Halacha from the Sifri. Eli Yemei Chaluto, Yemei Sifro Minayin. So that only got us to stage 1. The first 7, the first days of being a leper. What about the count, the days where one is counting to get out of it and, in between the 2 shavings? Again, Vidinhu, it's just logical. Ma Yemei Chaluto Ta'un Tiglachat. And now we're already at Amud Bet. Just like the days of Chaluto need shaving, Af Yemei Sifro, okay, basically these days are compared one to the other. It's not the greatest answer because it's asking a question and answering it by, well, it's obvious. Uma Yemei Chaluto Eno Lin Lo Min Minyan, Af Yemei Sifro, period. Okay, we're basically going to say since both require shaving, so they're both the same. It actually does give an answer. The answer is, right, since they both require shaving, also, and since, right, Yemei Chaluto need shaving, Yemei Sifro need shaving, Yemei Chaluto don't count, also Yemei Sifro don't count. Okay, now, 5th stage. Well, we talked about Yemei Chaluto, when you're a Nazir Mukhla. That's when the Kohen determines you're a definite Nazir. We talked about Yemei Sifro, which is after you do the first shaving, then you have another 7 days you count, and then you do a second shaving. Again, there's more to the process I'm dealing with, focusing on what we need for our purposes. But before that, there's possibly quarantine days, right? We all remember our Corona quarantine days. So there's the days of quarantine where the Kohen is not sure whether you have leprosy or not, and you are quarantined. Those are called Yemei Hezger, like closed. You're closed in, you're quarantined. So now, what if you're quarantined in waiting? Maybe you're a leper, maybe you're not. So during those days, did those days count as Nazir days? So that's the next question. This is the 5th stage. You might say, maybe those days where you're in waiting also don't count as days of Nazirut. And it would be logical. Why? Because again, they're going to do the same thing they've been doing all along. This has the same law as this. So whatever's true for that will be true for that. Both a Nazir Mukhlat, who's determined to definitely be with leprosy, and a Nazir during those days, those 7 days of quarantine, which sometimes even turn into 2 weeks of quarantine, both have tuma, they're matame, things they sit on, things they lie on, they pass on impurity in the same way. So in lamadita, so if they're similar in that way, why don't we say they're similar about the days? In lamadita, yemei chaluto she'eno lin lo min minyan. So just like the days of definitive leprosy don't count in your count of nizirut, so also those days shouldn't count. But the 6th stage, they're going to reject this and say, no. That's what you said, not true. Again, we're going to do the same thing we did before. We tried to compare Tuma and leper. And then we said, you can't compare because this has a unique halacha, right? The impurity there at a unique halacha. In this case, it's going to be the leper definitive days have a unique halacha that doesn't exist by the hezger, which is obvious. When you finish those days of being a leper, you have to shave, you have to bring sacrifices, there's a whole process. Therefore, they don't count. But tomorrow, you're going to try to compare that to the Yemei Hezger? It's just a quarantine, you're in a waiting period. If in the end the Kohen says you're not a leper, you want to say that these days, I'm sorry, it shouldn't be a question mark, that's a mistake. Therefore, they should count, okay? So because these don't need shaving and they don't need a sacrifice, they're not going to be as strict as the definitive leper days. I mean, you could have told me this even without knowing all those laws, right? Obviously, a possible leper. A leper in waiting, maybe he'll be a leper, is way more lenient than a definite leper. So in the end, the Midrash Halacha summarizes, Mikan Amru, from here we learn the following. Yemei Sifro, which are the days you count, the 7 days in between the 2 shavings of the leper, and Yemei Gamro. Gamro is another word for Chiluto, definitive leprosy. Don't count. Aval, and here they add 2 extra things. Yemei Hazav, Hazava, this matches what we saw in the Mishnah. If you're a Zav or a Zava, or Hezgei Rosh HaMitzorah, or you're a Mitzorah who's not clear whether you're really a Mitzorah or not, you're just quarantined, Hare Elu Olino, those count for you. Okay, that's the Brighton, or the Midrash Halacha. So we basically proved from here, the main point obviously is that when you're a definite Nazir, which is what we're looking for, or the days of counting, a definite leper, or the days of counting for leprosy, they don't count as days. And now what we're going to do is we're going to prove it's clearly in a case where there's a long Nazirut period. Why is that? And then it's going to go against Rav Chisda, because Rav Chisda, in the long Nazirut period, your leprosy days do count. And here it says your leprosy days don't count. So now we're going to prove that it can't be, this whole source can't be talking about a short period of Nazirut. Why? Hatani Mihat, it says there, Lo Amarta b'yimei tum'ah shekem mevatel et hakodmim. Tomar b'yimei chaluto. Remember, they compared and they said you can't compare impurity of a Nazir to leprosy days because impurity cancels all the previous days. And leprosy does not cancel the previous days. Now, in what case does leprosy not cancel the previous days? B'mai. If it's a 30-day period, this is what we talked about yesterday. Of course it cancels. Because if on day 15 you became a leper, when you finish your leprosy and you shave, not only did you pause the days, but you have to start from the very beginning because you need a 30-day period of hair growth. So it can't be Nizirut Mu'etet because in Nizirut Mu'etet, it does cancel all the previous days. So therefore, the only conclusion is, it must be talking about a long period of Nizirut. And Katani, what does it say there? It says these days don't count as days of Nazir. So Alma lo salkinle, clearly the days you're a leper don't count even in a long Nazirut, Shema Mina, and from there we reject Rav Chisda. So basically we brought these 2 kind of complicated, long-winded sources. One was a short source, but the content was harder to understand. This was actually easier content, but very long-winded. Both sources clearly indicated that days of leprosy do not count in long periods of Nazirut. Long terms of Nazirut don't count as days of Nazirut. Obviously, in short terms, they don't count either, but even in long terms, they don't count. And that goes against what Rav Chisda said. And from there, we're going to move on to the next Mishnah. New Mishnah. Ama Rabbi Elazar, it says Rabbi Elazar, it should be Rabbi Elazar. There's a whole explanation of why in terms of chronology, but I'm not going to get into that right now. I'm just going to go with it. It's Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar says, Mishum Rabbi Yehoshua. This is one of those, what was the bus driver's name in that joke? Okay, so pay attention, because you're probably not paying too much attention to this. Not only, and especially I was making you focus on the Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Eliezer, but he's quoting it in the name of Rabbi Yehoshua. And that's the part that's going to bother the Gemara, okay? Not the content of what he's saying. But he says the following. If you remember, we had these 2 Mishnayot. One set up a whole list of impurities that a Nazir has to shave for. And the other one set up, these are ways you could be impure to their dead body, but the Nazir doesn't shave for. So we have these 2 categories, which possibly were Torah law, rabbinic law. We talked about that also, but anyway, possibly not. We had some debates about that. Anyway, he says the following statement. All the ones of the first Mishnah that the Nazir has to shave for. Let's say you weren't a Nazir. You were just a regular person. You became impure in one of those ways. And then you walked into the temple. Now, you can't walk into the temple impure. If you do, you get karet. Right? It's a very severe punishment. You're only going to get karet if you were impure to mate in category 1. If you go move down to category 2, all the ones in the second Mishnah that Nazir doesn't have to shave for, and if you became impure in one of those ways, and you went into the temple, you don't get karet for that. Okay, I wouldn't recommend doing it, but you don't get karet. To which Rabbi Meir disagrees. I'm a Rabbi Meir. Lote zo kalam and sheretz. Okay, let's look at what's going on. We have, first thing you have to understand is what he's saying is shretzim, which are creepy crawly creatures. there's 8 of them that are matame in their death. We talked about this recently. If one of those creepy crawly creatures basically touches you, you touch it, okay, and you become impure from it, and you go into the temple, you will get karet. So comes Rabbi Meir and he says, what you're saying makes no sense because we have tumat mate, stage 1, more severe. We have impurity of the dead, stage 1. We have impurity of the dead, stage 2. And we have sheretz. Sheretz is clearly underneath both those categories because sheretz is obviously much less severe than tumat mate. Tumat mate is always much more severe. You become, if you become in contact with the dead body itself, you're tummy for 7 days. It's much more serious. Tumat sheretz is, you're tummy for the day. You go to the mikveh the next morning. By the nighttime, you're fine. It's a much lighter impurity. And even now, it's a little bit tricky if you say that whole thing is rabbinic, the second Mishnah, but still, he's basically saying it doesn't make any sense that tumat mate of, second quality tumat mate is going to be less severe than a sheretz. Doesn't make any sense. So therefore, he disagrees and he says, no, you really will get karet for all of these. Now the Gemara, as I said, is going to be caught up on this Rabbi Yehoshua. And Rabbi Yehoshua is the famous Rabbi Yehoshua who always gets into those issues with Rabban Gamliel. He's called Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya. So Rabbi Elazar, Mishum Rabbi Yehoshua Gamarla? No, it sounds like he learned it from Rabbi Yehoshua. What's the problem with that? Hamishum Rabbi Yehoshua bar Mamel Gamarla. He didn't learn it from that Rabbi Yehoshua. He learned it from a different Rabbi Yehoshua, Rabbi Yehoshua bar Mamel. So why did he quote it in the name of Rabbi Yehoshua? And now we're going to see Detanya, as it says in the Tosefta. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Shalachti la'ardaskia. I went to Ardaskia. Matzati et Rabbi Yehoshua ben Peter, Rosh. I sat there in front of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Peter, who was the head there. Shaya Yoshev v'dan lefnei Rabbi Meir b'halacha. He was teaching halacha in front of Rabbi Meir. What was he teaching? Our Mishnah. What did he say? By the way, there's 3 Rabbi Yehoshuas here, just not to confuse you too much. There's the Rabbi Yehoshua without a surname, so to speak, without a ben someone, who's the Stam Rabbi Yehoshua is Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya. We have Rabbi Yehoshua ben Petel, and we're going to see Rabbi Yehoshua bar Mamel. We're looking for Rabbi Yehoshua bar Mamel, but we're starting with Rabbi Yehoshua ben Petel. So he was talking in front of Rabbi Meir, and he said the halacha in our Mishnah. Okay, and he basically said the ones in Mishnah Aleph, you're going to be liable if you go into the temple, and the ones in Mishnah Bet, it's not necessarily Aleph and Bet, I'm just calling them, right? The first Mishnah and the second Mishnah. Okay, you won't be liable. Amarlo, so Rabbi Meir says exactly what he says in our Mishnah. Al tezo kalami sheretz. This shouldn't be any lighter than a sheretz, than one of those creatures. Amarti lo. Now comes in Rabbi Elazar, and this is the important Rabbi Elazar, and this is the important part for our purposes. Rabbi Elazar says, Rabbi Yehoshua bar Mamel. He goes to Rabbi Meir and he says, "Have you ever, the stuff that Rabbi Yehoshua bar Mamel says?" Amar li hein. He says, "Yes." So comes Rabbi Elazar and says, "Well, didn't you know? Kach amar li Rabbi Yehoshua bar Mamel mishum Rabbi Yehoshua." Now notice, here comes Rabbi Elazar, and he quotes to Rabbi Meir in this Tosefta the words of Rabbi Yehoshua bar Mamel, who is quoting Rabbi Yehoshua. So now you see the issue. In our Mishnah, he skipped over Rabbi Yehoshua bar Mamel. That's what the Gemara is concerned with. Why didn't he say, I said in the name of Rabbi Yehoshua bar Mamel? Theoretically, he could have said in the name of Rabbi Yehoshua bar Mamel, who said in the name of Rabbi Yehoshua. We've seen this many times where they quote, this one said that, and this one said that, etc. So he says anyway, Kach amar li Rabbi Yehoshua bar Mamel mishum Rabbi Yehoshua. Kol tumam and amech Nazir megalech aleh. Okay, same line. Chayav aleh mishum bi'at mikdash. Kol tumam and amech and Nazir megalech aleh and chayavin aleh mishum bi'at mikdash. Again, I'm not going to repeat the translation again. It's the same exact law. He basically quotes in the name of Rabbi Yehoshua bar Mamel. So what we're dealing with in this Gemara has nothing to do with content, has to do with wording. Why did he quote Rabbi Yehoshua bar Mamel, in Rabbi Yehoshua in our Mishnah, when he actually learned it from Rabbi Yehoshua bar Mamel, who learned it from Rabbi Yehoshua? He didn't learn it directly from Rabbi Yehoshua. So Heve Mishum Rabbi Yehoshua bar Mamel Gamrila. He learned it from him. So here comes the answer. And from here you learn how you're supposed to quote this. Shmamina, from here we can derive. Kol shmatata d'mit'amr b'beit tlata. Anything that was said by 3 people. Batrat kadmai ubatrai amrina, and you mentioned the first one. And the last one, mitzia lo amrina. The middleman gets dropped off. Doesn't mean he has to get dropped off, but he could be dropped off. That's what we learned from this mission. Right? Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, af anena mitanina. He's going to say, I can quote this now from a Braita also. It says, Amar Nachuma Lablal. Okay, this is a Mishnah actually in Peah. Hach mekublani mi Rabbi Miyasha, shekibel me'aba. I think if I'm reading correctly, it's a Mishnah in Peah. Anyway, this is what I learned from Rabbi Miyashe, shekibel me'aba, shekibel me'nazugot. Okay, it's interesting that we're learning it from here because he actually quotes this one who quoted that, one who quoted that, but it's not like he just quotes two. But you're going to see he skips a very important generation. That's going to be the main point. He skips one of the middlemen. Okay, so let's keep going. We'll learn from the Zugot, right? Those were the earlier, like before the Tanaim. Shekiblu min hanivim, they got it from the prophets. Halacha Moshe miSinai, and most people get rid of the next bunch of words, but b'zareh shevet v'chardal b'shnayim v'shlosha v'kamot shenotem be'am mikol echad echad. I'm not going to get into the content there. Most people even take these words out of the Gemara. But the point is, here's a list. This one learned from that one. This one learned from that one. Who's missing? You all know the famous song, right? Moshe kibel Torah miSinai, right? U'misara liYehoshua, Yehoshua lazkenim. Now, what is it, right? Miskenim lenivim. Notice who's missing here. It's actually the zkenim are also missing. But ilu Yehoshua v'Kalev lo kachashiv. They skipped Yehoshua. Notice we don't have Yehoshua in that version. It's from Pirkei Avot, right? So we don't have that version of Kalev, but Kalev comes in here as well. Apparently, Moshe gave the Torah to Yehoshua and Kalev, and they're not mentioned here. So what do you see? Shmami, now from here, you see that you can skip those middlemen. Yehoshua has skipped him. He's certainly an important person in the passing on of tradition. So it is interesting that to prove this, he quotes one where they do quote a whole bunch of different stages, but they skip sections. Okay. So that was a total aside about how to quote someone when you're quoting. Does it have to be the person you directly learn from, or could it be you could skip that person and teach it in the name of who he learned it from? Now we have a new Mishnah. So this Mishnah is going against, I just want to remind you, we've talked about these a lot already. The first Mishnah had half a cup of bones and a half a reveat of wine, a log of wine. Of blood. Confusing it with the right reveat. By the way, I thought this was obvious, but someone asked me, and I was thinking I really should say it if I didn't say it before. This reveat, okay, so we had the half a kav and a half a log versus a quarter log and a quarter kav of bones in the second Mishnah, right? Where those are things that even though generally, and that was the whole machloket Tosefta of Rambam, is it just a tradition that the Nazir doesn't shave for these, or are they only rabbinic in law? But it's a very big basic law, this reveat of blood, the quarter log of blood, and the quarter kav of bones, that generally it is matame even in an ohel, in a tent, but the Nazir doesn't shave for them. So first of all, the reveat, I wanted to tell you, we're coming up to Pesach and Shiurim. A reveat is the main shiur for Kiddush, okay? And that's like the main shiur of wine is a reveat, just like a kazayit is for matzah, for example. Okay, kazayit by food, reveat by liquids. So here it's by liquids, by the blood. Now, if you remember, the Reva Kav of Atzamot, in the end we said, the way we derive from the Mishnah, it didn't say it in the Mishnah, even though it's in the Mishnah that you don't shave for, we said that if that was ohel, tent, but if you touched it, it actually would make the Nazir shave. If you touched it or carried it. But the Revi Dam, no. And if you remember, they said, why does it say Revi Dam? Remember, it was all unnecessary. So the Reva Kav, we said, was unnecessary, but they added it because they wanted to teach you specifically, but ohel, no. But yes, by touching. I'm sorry, right? And in ohel, it's not. If you touch it, it is. But the Revi Dam, we didn't say that. With Revi Dam, by touching, you're not going to be impure. But we said, why did it mention it in that Mishnah? Because it disagrees with Rabbi Akiva. And here's Rabbi Akiva. Okay, he comes in this Mishnah. Amar Rabbi Akiva, dan tilifnei Rabbi Elazar. And I said the following logical argument. Here comes his argument why dam should be mitame maga umasa, even at the size of a reveat. He says the following: Im etzem keseora, if a bone the size of a barley, which is so small, right? And yet, and it's also got a lesser strong, right? It's got a weaker halacha because eino mitame adam ba'oel. It's not mitame in a tent, only if you touch it. Nazir magalecha magao ba'masao, and yet the Nazir, it's in the first Mishnah. Remember, etzem keseora. If you touch it, the Nazir has to shave for it. So Revi Dam, Shu Mitame Adam Ba'oel, Eino Din Shehan, Nazir Magalecha Maga Umasa'a. So shouldn't a Revi Dam, which is more strict halacha because it's Mitame in a tent, shouldn't you think that at least by touching it, from Etzem Kesorah, you can learn only for touching, but by touching it or carrying it, shouldn't you be the Nazir have to shave? So which Amar Li, Maze Akiva Ein Danim Kam Mikal V'chomer. So Rabbi Elazar says, I said to him, what are you talking about? We don't learn from a kal v'chomer in this case. Ukishabati v'ertzeti dvarim lefnei Rabbi Yehoshua. And when I told this to Rabbi Yehoshua, what did he say to me? Yafpe amalta, it was good what you said to Rabbi Akiva, but I'm going to strengthen it one more. Why? Ela ken amru halacha. In other words, he said, well, the truth is it's, it could be when Rabbi Akiva said it in front of Rabbi Yehoshua. Rabbi Yehoshua said, I have to check which one said it, but the point is Rabbi Yehoshua said, logic is very nice, but in the end, and this is a very interesting line to end with, very important line in halacha, while logic, and all the time in Gemara we're dealing with logic, everyone's bringing logical arguments, but in the end, tradition wins out. So basically, tradition wins out, and Rabbi Yehoshua basically says, no, my question wasn't about Rabbi Yehoshua, it was about who Rabbi Yehoshua is responding to Rabbi Elazar, I think. I think he says, Yafeh Amarta, but the tricky part is Yafeh Amarta sounds like it's Rabbi. Let me just check for 1 second. But in any case, what we have here is he's saying that tradition wins out. Okay, tradition is more important than anything else. So your logic may be great, but tradition wins out. Right? I guess he's talking to Rabbi Akiva. Yeah, Rabbi Akiva is talking at this point. And Rabbi Akiva basically, first Rabbi Elazar says to him, we don't learn from Kal V'chomer. And then Rabbi Akiva went to Rabbi Yehoshua and he said to him, this is my logical argument. And Rabbi Yehoshua says, wow, great logical argument, but it doesn't help. Because our tradition tells us that Revi Dam is not mitame mago masa at all. Not forget about, it's not even, again, it's mitame, it makes the Nazir impure, but he doesn't shave for this. This isn't in the level of impurity that would make the Nazir shave. That's our tradition. This, by the way, is where Tosefta got it, that it's a tradition, halacha l'Moshe Mishna, and that maybe Revi Dam is mitame midoraita as opposed to the Rambam who said differently, but it's a tradition that this doesn't mess up the Nazir. And that's what we end today with this really important line. So structure of our daf, quickly, I know it's late. We took two sources, forget about getting into the details of the sources. Two sources, one about this person who was Safek Nazir, Nazir, Safek became impure, Safek became a leper, was definitely a Nazir, and all the things he has to do, and particularly when it's a year, right, a year Nazirut, and that seemed to go against Rav Chisda. And the second source also went against Rav Chisda about trying to find the source for how do we know that the days of leprosy don't count, and then we proved that source was obviously about a long term of Nazirut, and that goes strictly against what Rav Chisda said, that in a long period of Nazirut, those days overlap. So both those sources knocked him out. Then we brought this Rabbi Elazar in the name of Rabbi Yehoshua, that all the ones in Mishnah 1, you also are liable for going into the temple. All the ones in Mishnah 2, you're not. And then we had a whole big thing. Why do you quote from Rabbi Yehoshua, not who we learned it from, Rabbi Yehoshua bar Mamel? We said, you can skip the middleman. And then we had this debate about the Revi Dam. Rabbi Akiva thinks the Revi Dam is mitame, a Nazir. He has to shave for it if he touches or carries it, against our Mishnah earlier. And the rabbis basically say to him, it's very nice you say this, you have a good logical argument, learning it from Esem K'Solah, but in the end, our tradition wins out, and our tradition tells us that this is not the case. Okay, tradition likely is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, and that basically trumps your logic. That's where we ended for today. We have a bit of Gemara on that, and with that, we'll finish our chapter tomorrow. Have a great day, everybody.